My husband called me at midnight with a terrifying command. He works for the FBI, so when he told me to hide in the attic and lock the heavy steel door, I did not ask questions. I thought a dangerous cartel was coming to kill us. I was completely wrong. The monsters walking through my front door were much worse. Through a crack in the floorboards, I saw the faces of the people who were supposed to love me most, and they brought a loaded gun, meant for my head. My name is Allison. I am 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant tracing hidden money. For years, my family treated me like their personal bank. Tonight, they decided to make a permanent withdrawal. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever realized the people closest to you are your worst enemies. I knelt on the rough plywood of the attic floor. Dust clung to my sweaty palms as I pressed my face against the small ventilation gap looking directly down into our expansive living room. Just 10 minutes ago, my husband Derek had called me in a panic. He claimed his undercover operation had been compromised and that armed men were heading to our house. I had scrambled up the pull-down stairs, terrified and alone, believing my husband was racing back from Washington to save me. Down below, the electronic deadbolt on the front door chimed. I braced myself, expecting to see masked men kicking in the hardwood. Instead, the door swung open smoothly. The keypad flashed green, meaning someone had used the master passcode. Derek stepped into the foyer. He was not wearing his tactical gear or a suit. He wore a casual leather jacket, looking completely calm. He was not in Washington. He had been lying to me. But the shock of seeing my husband did not compare to the absolute horror of seeing who walked in right behind him. My mother, Martha, strolled in carrying her expensive designer handbag. My older sister, Brianna, followed close behind, wiping her pristine boots on the welcome mat. Finally, Brianna's husband, Jamal, a former private security contractor, stepped inside and firmly locked the door behind them. My brain struggled to process the scene. Why was my entire family here at midnight? Why had Derek lied about the cartel? Derek walked over to the marble kitchen island and unrolled a large paper sheet. Even from my hiding spot, I recognized it. It was the architectural floor plan of our custom-built home. Jamal, an imposing African-American man who usually greeted me with a warm hug at Thanksgiving, walked up to the island and studied the blueprints. Derek reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a heavy, matte black pistol. He smoothly screwed a long, cylindrical silencer onto the barrel. The metallic click echoed through the quiet house, sending a violent shiver down my spine. He slid the weapon across the marble counter right into Jamal's large hands. "You know the layout," Derek said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "She is exactly where I told her to be. Up in the attic. The steel door is locked from the inside, but you can bypass the hinges with the bolt cutters in the garage." Jamal picked up the gun, checking the magazine. "Make sure the back window is smashed," Jamal replied. "I will tear up the living room to make it look like a struggle. When the local police arrive, it needs to look like a home invasion gone wrong. A burglary turned fatal." I pressed a hand over my mouth to muffle my own breathing. My husband, the man who had sworn to protect me, was orchestrating my murder, and my sister and mother were standing right there watching him do it. Martha walked over to the kitchen sink and poured herself a glass of my expensive filtered water. "Are you absolutely certain the trust fund reverts to you, Derek?" she asked, casually taking a sip. "My father left Allison $12 million. That money belongs to this family, not just to you." Derek scoffed, leaning against the counter. "As her surviving spouse, I inherit everything by default. Once the coroner signs the death certificate, I will wire the $3 million I promised to Brianna's account to clear your massive debts. But Jamal needs to get up those stairs right now." Brianna crossed her arms and glared up at the ceiling. "Just do it quickly, Jamal. I am tired of begging my little sister for scraps. She refused to co-sign my loan last week. She deserves this." Tears pricked my eyes, but they did not fall. The panic that had gripped my chest suddenly vanished, replaced by a freezing, calculated rage. They thought I was just a naive wife. They forgot that I am a forensic accountant who investigates financial fraud for a living. I uncover lies, I track stolen assets, and I destroy criminals using nothing but data. They wanted my $12 million. But they were about to find out that the house they were standing in was fully wired, fully automated, and completely under my control. I silently flipped open my laptop in the dark. The screen illuminated my face with a faint blue glow. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every smart lock, every hidden security camera, and every financial account was linked to the secure server I had built myself. Derek always mocked my obsession with home network security, calling it paranoid. Tonight, that paranoia was going to save my life and destroy theirs. I watched Jamal take the first step up the wooden staircase. His heavy boots made a soft thud against the wood. My mother poured another glass of water while my sister checked her makeup in the hallway mirror. They were entirely unbothered by the fact that my blood was about to spill. I took one last deep breath, letting the terrified wife die in that dusty attic. The woman who remained was ready to go to war. The heavy thud of Jamal moving up the stairs echoed through the silent house. He was taking his time, moving with the terrifying precision of a trained professional. I glanced at the live camera feed running in the corner of my laptop screen. He had just reached the second-floor landing. I had less than 2 minutes before he stood outside the attic door. Down in the living room, my mother set her glass on the marble counter. Her voice drifted up through the floorboards, crisp and annoyed. "I simply cannot fathom why my late husband left the bulk of his estate to her," Martha complained, adjusting her expensive silk scarf. "She has always been so utterly selfish with that money, hoarding it while her own flesh and blood struggles to survive." Brianna let out a bitter laugh, leaning against the kitchen island. "She thinks because she analyzes corporate fraud all day that she is better than us. Do you remember last month when I asked her to help cover the mortgage on my new condo? She actually had the nerve to tell me to get a real job instead of asking for handouts. Tonight is just karma for her arrogance." Derek walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a scotch. He swirled the amber liquid, looking completely relaxed. "She was always too smart for her own good," he muttered. "But she made one fatal mistake. She trusted me. Once the coroner signs off on the home invasion story, the spousal inheritance laws kick in. I will wire the $3 million to your account by Friday, Brianna. You can pay off those loan sharks and keep your condo." Their casual conversation about dividing my assets while my assassin climbed the stairs fueled my focus. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled up the primary dashboard for my trust fund. $12 million sat securely in a high-yield account. Derek thought my death would automatically trigger a transfer to his name. He was wrong. As a forensic accountant, I spent my career watching greedy people steal from vulnerable victims. I had spent months quietly updating the legal framework of my wealth, just in case my FBI husband ever tried to cross me. My fingers flew across the keyboard, completely silent. First, I locked Derek out of the home network. I revoked his administrative privileges, blinding him to the security cameras he thought he had turned off. I quickly rerouted the live video and audio feeds from the living room and the hallways directly to an encrypted cloud server based in Switzerland. Every word my mother said, every promise of dirty money Derek made was being recorded and locked away where they could never delete it. On the camera feed, Jamal drew closer. He was on the final flight of stairs leading to the 3rd floor. I saw the glint of the suppressed pistol in his right hand. I opened my secure banking portal. The interface prompted me for a dual authentication code. I scanned my fingerprint on the laptop sensor. A green checkmark appeared. The $12 million balance stared back at me. I opened a secondary window, accessing a maze of offshore shell accounts I had set up for an undercover audit last year. I selected an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet. In the kitchen, Derek issued another cold command. "Martha, wipe down that glass. We need this scene pristine. Jamal will smash the back patio door to simulate the break-in, but we cannot leave any DNA from a family visit. We were never here tonight." I typed in the transfer amount, all $12 million. The screen flashed a warning message asking if I was sure I wanted to empty the primary trust. I hit confirm. A loading bar appeared on the screen, crawling from left to right. 10%, 20%. Jamal stopped moving. The floorboards just outside the attic door creaked loudly. He was standing right on the other side of the heavy steel frame. I saw the doorknob slowly begin to turn. The metal latch clicked, but the deadbolt held firm. "Open the door, Allison," Jamal whispered through the wood. His voice was smooth, almost soothing. "Derek sent me. It is not safe out here. Let me in so I can protect you." He was trying to coax me out to avoid breaking the lock. I stared at the loading bar on my screen. 80%, 90%. I did not make a sound. I held my breath, watching the progress bar hit 100%. The screen flashed green, transfer complete. The trust account was officially empty. Derek was orchestrating my murder for a fortune that no longer existed. Jamal sighed heavily outside the door. "Fine, we do this the hard way." I heard the metallic clank of heavy bolt cutters hitting the floor. He was a former private security contractor who had breached compounds overseas. A residential door would not stop him. It was time for my next move. The sharp scrape of metal against metal pierced the quiet. Jamal had wedged the thick steel jaws of the bolt cutters around the deadbolt casing. He grunted, applying his full body weight. The wood frame began to splinter and crack under the immense pressure. I knew I only had seconds before the mechanism gave way entirely, and he walked in to finish the job. I closed my banking portal and opened the master control panel for the house. When Derek and I renovated this place 2 years ago, I insisted on installing commercial-grade security doors in the upper hallways, claiming it was necessary to protect my highly sensitive client audit files. He had laughed at the expense, calling me overly cautious, but he let me do it. I highlighted the second-floor hallway zone on my screen. I took a deep breath and pressed the enter key. A loud mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards. Instantly, 2 heavy reinforced steel doors slammed shut at both ends of the upstairs hallway. The automated deadbolts fired simultaneously, with a series of sharp metallic clicks. Jamal stopped cutting immediately. The sudden silence was deafening. He was standing in a windowless 10-foot corridor between the master bedroom and the main stairs, completely sealed in like a rat in a trap. "Hey, Jamal!" yelled his voice, muffled through the heavy walls. "Derek, the hallway doors just dropped. I am boxed in up here. Open the system right now." Downstairs, the relaxed atmosphere vanished. I watched on my screen as Derek practically dropped his expensive glass of scotch. He rushed to the wall-mounted control pad near the kitchen island. I could see the panic rising in his chest as he aggressively tapped the digital screen, trying to enter his override codes. "It is completely unresponsive," Derek shouted back, his cool demeanor shattering completely. "It says the local network is locked down by the primary administrator." Brianna's voice shrilled with sudden fear. "What does that mean, Derek? Did the police remotely lock the house? Did someone hear us talking about the money?" "No," Derek snapped aggressively, pulling out his phone. "The police do not have that kind of access. Only Allison and I do. But she is just a numbers cruncher. She does not know how to override my master security codes." He was so incredibly arrogant. He truly believed my technical skills stopped at basic spreadsheets. While he frantically tried to reboot the network from his phone, I packed my laptop into my waterproof tactical backpack. I had prepared a survival bag months ago when I first noticed the glaring financial discrepancies in his bank statements. I moved to the far corner of the attic, slipping behind a stack of dusty cardboard boxes. During the massive renovations, the contractors found an old laundry chute that ran from the roof level all the way down to the basement. Derek had ordered it sealed up with drywall. I had paid the foreman an extra $1,000 in cash to install a hidden reinforced hatch instead. I pushed the heavy boxes aside and slid the metal panel open. A rush of cold, damp air hit my face. The shaft was extremely narrow, but I am small, and survival is a powerful motivator. I slipped my legs into the dark opening, gripping the internal metal rungs the contractors had left behind for maintenance access. Before I lowered myself completely into the darkness, I pulled out my phone. I opened the smart home application. I selected the emergency protocol and triggered the house alarms. A deafening siren erupted from every speaker in the house, accompanied by blinding strobe lights meant to disorient armed intruders. Through the floorboards, I heard my mother scream in pure, unadulterated terror. "Turn it off!" Martha shrieked over the blaring noise. "Turn it off right now, Derek! My ears are bleeding." "I cannot." Derek roared back, his voice thick with frustration and sudden realization. "She locked me out. She knows we are here." Upstairs, Jamal began violently slamming his heavy bolt cutters against the steel hallway doors, cursing loudly. The trained hunter was officially caged. I smiled in the darkness and began my descent. I climbed down the narrow shaft, my boots finding the rungs with practiced ease. The rough brick walls scraped my elbows, but I did not stop. I bypassed the second floor, sliding right past the very hallway where Jamal was currently destroying his shoulders against solid steel. I bypassed the first floor, leaving the flashing strobe lights and my panicking family behind. I reached the basement level and pushed open the bottom hatch. The concrete basement was dark and silent, insulated from the chaos above. I crept toward the small egress window at the back of the house. I popped the latch, squeezed my shoulders through the tight opening, and tumbled out into the cold night air. I landed softly in the damp bushes lining our backyard. The siren was still blaring inside, muffled by the thick exterior walls. I pulled my dark hood up and sprinted toward the thick tree line at the edge of the property. I did not look back. I had survived the ambush. Now it was time to make them pay. The damp earth soaked through my jeans as I crouched behind a thick oak tree at the edge of our property. The deafening wail of the house alarm suddenly died, cutting off mid-shriek. Derek must have taken an axe to the main control panel. A heavy silence settled over the neighborhood, broken only by shattering glass. Jamal was doing his job. He was smashing the back patio doors, overturning the expensive furniture, and creating the illusion of a violent struggle. Jamal was earning his cut by destroying my home. I watched my husband step onto the back deck. He ruffled his hair, ripped his shirt collar, and rubbed his eyes until they were red. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Even from afar, I pictured his performance. The frantic tone, the desperate plea for help. He was an FBI agent trained in psychological manipulation. The local police would eat out of the palm of his hand. Less than 5 minutes later, the quiet street exploded with flashing lights. 3 patrol cars screeched onto our driveway. Uniformed officers poured out. I saw Derek run out the front door. He fell to his knees on the lawn, burying his face in his hands. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. My mother and sister were nowhere to be seen. They had slipped out the side gate before the police arrived, vanishing. One of the officers gently helped Derek to his feet. I recognized Deputy Jenkins, who had attended our summer barbecue last month. Derek was flashing his federal badge, taking immediate control. He pointed toward the broken window, gesturing wildly to the empty upstairs rooms. I took a single step forward, instinct screaming at me to run to the cruisers and tell the truth. But I froze. I am a forensic auditor. I rely on logic, not emotion. If I walked out of the woods right now, Derek would play the concerned husband. He would tell them the home invaders traumatized me, that I was hysterical and confused. With his FBI credentials, he could have me placed under a mandatory psychiatric hold before sunrise. I would be locked in a hospital ward, heavily medicated and easily disposed of. Jamal would probably be the man assigned to transport me. Going to the police was an absolute death sentence. I needed to vanish completely. I backed away from the tree line, moving silently through the dense woods. I navigated purely by memory, avoiding the massive properties with bright motion sensor floodlights. 2 streets over, I approached the driveway of the Harrison residence. They were vacationing in Florida, but their grandson had left his older sedan parked on the street. I knew from neighborhood gossip that he always left a spare key magnetically attached inside the rear wheel well. I dropped to my knees on the cold asphalt and ran my hand along the rusted metal above the tire. My fingers brushed against a small plastic box. I pulled it loose and retrieved the dull silver key. I slid into the driver's seat, keeping the headlights completely off. The old engine sputtered to life with a low, reliable hum. I put the car in drive and rolled away, sticking to the dark back roads where the wealthy did not bother installing traffic cameras. I drove for 45 minutes, crossing the county line into a heavily industrialized zone. I needed a place where questions were never asked. I pulled into the flickering neon glow of the Starlight Inn, a rundown motel sandwiched between a truck stop and an abandoned diner. The dark parking lot was filled with massive commercial rigs. I walked into the cramped lobby. The night clerk barely looked up from his television. I handed him 2 crisp $100 bills from my emergency stash. I asked for a room in the back, paying for 3 nights in advance. He slid a brass key across the scratched counter without asking for identification. Room number 12 smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I securely locked the flimsy wooden door, slid the rusted metal chain into place, and wedged a heavy chair under the doorknob. The aesthetic was a sharp contrast to my custom-built mansion, but it was the safest place on earth for me right now. I sat on the sagging mattress and pulled my laptop from the waterproof backpack. I plugged it into the flickering wall outlet and connected to my encrypted mobile hotspot. The digital war was just beginning. My husband Derek truly thought he had successfully erased me from his life forever. But he had just given a forensic accountant the ultimate motivation to audit his entire existence. The thin curtains of room 12 barely filtered the harsh morning sunlight. I sat cross-legged on the sagging mattress, nursing a cup of bitter, instant coffee. My laptop screen was the only bright spot in the dingy room. I had been awake for over 24 hours, running trace routes and securing my digital footprint. I navigated to the local news. Channel 7 was broadcasting live from my front lawn. The yellow police tape cordoned off my beautiful rose bushes. Officers walked in and out. Standing right in the center of the driveway, surrounded by a cluster of microphones and bright camera lights, was my family. Derek stood slightly behind the group, wearing his FBI badge clipped to his belt. He looked exhausted and heartbroken. He had perfectly arranged his hair to look disheveled. My mother Martha stepped up to the podium. She wore a dark conservative dress. She gripped the microphone with trembling hands. "We are absolutely devastated," Martha said, her voice cracking perfectly. "My beautiful daughter Allison was taken from us in the middle of the night. Her home was violently invaded. We just want her back safely." I rolled my eyes. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Then Brianna stepped forward, wrapping an arm around our mother. Brianna wiped a fake tear from her cheek. "We are also incredibly worried because Allison has a long history of mental instability," Brianna told the reporters, leaning into the microphone. "She has suffered from severe paranoid delusions recently. She might be confused or disoriented. If anyone sees her, please approach with extreme caution and contact the authorities immediately." My grip on the coffee cup tightened. They were not just playing the victims, they were actively discrediting me. If I somehow managed to reach the police and tell them my family tried to murder me, the groundwork was already laid. I would be written off as a hysterical, paranoid woman having a mental breakdown. Derek was using his FBI playbook perfectly. But Derek was not the only one who knew how to play a strategic game. They wanted to control the narrative on live television. I decided it was time to change the channel. I opened a secure terminal on my laptop. Weeks ago, while investigating a corporate espionage case, I had built a backdoor script that could hijack unencrypted broadcasting tools. Local news stations were notoriously lazy with their cybersecurity. Within 90 seconds, I had bypassed Channel 7's firewall. I gained full administrative access to their live social media feed, which was currently displaying viewer comments on a ticker at the bottom of the television broadcast. I did not want to show my hand completely just yet, but I needed to remind them that I was watching. I opened a hidden folder on my hard drive labeled Family Liabilities. 2 months ago, my mother reported her priceless antique diamond necklace stolen. She fired her longtime housekeeper over it, but my security cameras had caught the real thief. I selected a high-resolution screenshot from the hidden camera in the hallway. It clearly showed Brianna slipping the diamond necklace into her designer purse. I paired it with a second photo I pulled from her bank records. A time-stamped image of Brianna standing at a cash for gold pawn shop across town holding that exact necklace. I uploaded both images directly to the Channel 7 live broadcast feed. I added a simple caption: "Who needs home invaders when your sister robs you blind?" I hit enter. The images instantly hijacked the live ticker at the bottom of the screen. They broadcasted straight into thousands of living rooms across the state, including the monitor sitting right next to the reporters on my lawn. I watched the live feed with pure satisfaction. A reporter in the front row looked down at his phone, then looked up at Brianna with extreme confusion. Another reporter pointed at the broadcast monitor facing the driveway. "Brianna," a reporter shouted, interrupting her fake crying. "Your own local news feed just posted security photos of you stealing your mother's diamond necklace and pawning it. Can you explain this?" Brianna froze. The color instantly drained from her face. Martha whipped her head around to look at the monitor. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. "You told me the maid took that necklace," Martha shrieked. "That belonged to my grandmother, you greedy little thief!" Brianna stumbled backward, holding her hands up defensively. "Mom, it is fake. Someone is framing me. It is the hackers." Derek lunged forward, grabbing the microphones and shoving the cameras away. "Turn the feeds off!" he yelled, his professional composure shattering. "This press conference is over." The news feed abruptly cut to a commercial break. I took a slow sip of my terrible coffee and smiled. The perfect facade of the grieving family was broken. They were turning on each other exactly as I planned. The first domino had fallen. The first domino had fallen. While my mother and sister were screaming at each other on national television, Derek quietly slipped away from the chaos. He got into his unmarked federal vehicle and drove straight to the financial district. I knew his exact destination because I was tracking the GPS on his phone. He was heading to the downtown branch of Pinnacle Wealth Management. He needed money immediately to pay Jamal for the hit and to keep Brianna quiet. His plan relied entirely on quick cash flow. Without it, his murderous alliance would crumble before sunset. He walked into the sleek glass lobby, demanding an immediate meeting with my primary portfolio manager, Richard Powell. Derek was operating on pure arrogance. He had the official police report, the national news coverage, and his federal badge. He truly believed that was all he needed to bypass the standard banking protocols and claim my $12 million trust fund. What he did not know was that I had tapped into the bank manager office security camera weeks ago during a routine corporate audit of their network infrastructure. I watched the live video and audio feed from my dingy motel room, sipping my cold coffee. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every desperate breath he took. Derek sat in the plush leather chair opposite the massive mahogany desk. He placed a copy of the police report down. "My wife is missing," Derek said, his voice dripping with fabricated exhaustion. "The local police suspect a violent abduction. As her legal husband and the primary beneficiary of her estate, I need to secure her financial assets immediately. I want you to initiate a wire transfer of $3 million to this routing number by the end of the business day." He tapped the paper with his index finger, projecting absolute authority. Richard adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking at my account profile on his dual monitors. He typed rapidly on his keyboard, but his professional smile quickly faded. His brow furrowed in confusion. "I am terribly sorry to hear about your wife, Derek," Richard said slowly. "But I cannot authorize any transfers from Allison Primary Trust. In fact, the system says I am completely locked out of the account." Derek leaned forward, his friendly facade dropping instantly. He slammed his hand flat against the polished wood. "What do you mean you are locked out? I am her husband. We do not have a standard prenuptial agreement. I have full legal right of survivorship. Transfer the money right now, or I will have the Federal Bureau investigate this branch for financial obstruction." Richard swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he turned his monitor so Derek could see the red flashing warning banner on the screen. Allison came into the office 2 weeks ago and completely updated her primary trust directives, Richard explained, his voice shaking. She instituted a highly specific and irreversible dead man switch. The new legal clause explicitly states that if she ever goes missing, is kidnapped, or dies under any unusual circumstances, her entire $12 million estate is immediately frozen. Derek stared at the glowing screen, the muscles in his jaw ticking furiously. Frozen for how long, he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Richard cleared his throat, pulling at his shirt collar. It is not just frozen, Derek. If she is not located safely within 48 hours of the initial police report, the funds are automatically dispersed to a designated list of domestic violence shelters across the country. The contracts are fully executed. You have been completely removed as a beneficiary. You do not get a single cent. There is no workaround, no loophole, and no manager override available. Derek erupted. He stood up with such explosive force that his heavy leather chair flipped backward and crashed to the floor. He grabbed the heavy brass pen holder from the desk and hurled it violently at the decorative glass wall. The glass shattered into hundreds of jagged pieces, raining down on the carpet. "You are lying," Derek roared, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "She is just a numbers cruncher. She does not have the legal authority to bypass state marital property laws." Richard pressed himself against the back wall, terrified by the sudden violence. "She is a senior forensic accountant," Richard stammered loudly. "She drafted the amendment with 3 separate corporate litigation firms. It is absolutely airtight. Even the federal government cannot break a charitable trust dispersion without a decade of expensive litigation. You have been entirely outplayed by your own wife." Derek stood breathing heavily in the ruined office, his fists clenched at his sides. He finally realized the terrifying truth. I was not just a naive wife who got lucky and escaped his assassin. I had anticipated his betrayal. I had financially castrated him before he even handed that suppressed pistol to Jamal. Derek stormed out of the bank, leaving a trail of shattered glass behind him. He had promised Jamal and Brianna millions of dollars by Friday. Now he had absolutely nothing to give them. The hunters were about to realize they could not afford the ammunition they needed to kill me. Derek sat in his unmarked federal vehicle, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He stared blankly at the shattered glass inside the bank lobby. The reality of his situation was setting in. I was not a helpless victim hiding in the woods. I was a fully mobilized threat, and I had just cut off his escape route. He pulled a burner phone from his center console. He could not risk using his official FBI device for this conversation. He dialed Jamal. Jamal answered on the second ring, a television blaring in his living room. "Tell me you have the $3 million, Jamal demanded. "Brianna is freaking out about the news broadcast, and my guys are asking for their cut for staging the break-in." "We have a massive problem," Derek replied, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Allison is alive. She locked the trust fund behind a dead man's switch. We are not getting a single cent unless we find her and force her to reverse it before the 48-hour window closes." A heavy silence fell over the line. "What do you mean she is alive?" Jamal snapped, his professional calm evaporating. "I checked that attic myself. She vanished." "And what do you mean she locked the money?" "You told me this was a guaranteed payout, Derek. I am not catching a federal murder charge for free." "Listen to me," Derek interrupted harshly. "She is a forensic accountant. She planned for this. She hijacked the newsfeed this morning and she froze the accounts. She is out there and she is fighting back. I need you to find her." "Use your FBI toys," Jamal shot back. "Put a trace on her cell phone or run her face through the highway camera network. You are the feds." "I cannot do that," Derek hissed, hitting his steering wheel. "The local police are breathing down my neck. If I flag her assets on the federal database, the Office of Professional Responsibility will be alerted. They will start auditing my files and we will both end up in federal prison. You need to use your underground security contacts. Use the dark web brokers you met overseas. Find a digital breadcrumb." Jamal cursed loudly. "Fine. But when I find her, my price just doubled." He hung up. Back in my dingy motel room, I watched the encrypted audio waveform of their conversation play out on my screen. I had activated the microphone on Derek's smartwatch right before he made the call. They were panicking, turning on each other, and most importantly, they were looking for me. I knew Jamal was exceptionally good at tracking people. He had spent years as a private military contractor hunting down targets in hostile territories. If I stayed off the grid, he would eventually start shaking down my friends and colleagues, exposing my survival too early. I needed to control his movements. I needed to give him a target. I opened a secure virtual machine on my laptop and accessed a hidden offshore bank account I had set up under a shell corporation. Connected to this account was a single prepaid corporate credit card. I had mailed that card to a P.O. box near the county line months ago. Early this morning before the press conference, I had retrieved it. I logged into a dark web routing service and spoofed my physical location. I initiated a small $20 transaction at an automated gas station pump located on the desolate edge of the industrial district, about 10 miles from my actual motel. It was a completely automated station, no cameras, no clerk, just rusted metal pumps, an empty highway. I left the transaction pending for exactly 3 minutes, just long enough for the underground data brokers Jamal employed to catch the ping on the financial networks. Then I canceled it. I switched my screen to the GPS tracker I had magnetically attached to the undercarriage of Jamal's heavy black SUV 2 weeks ago. I watched the blinking red dot representing his vehicle. For 10 minutes it remained stationary in his suburban driveway. Then the dot began to move. It pulled out of his neighborhood, merging onto the interstate, accelerating rapidly. He was heading straight for the industrial district. His underground contacts had taken the bait. Jamal thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had caught a desperate woman making a careless mistake with a credit card. I closed the tracking window and packed my laptop into my backpack. I checked the chamber of the compact handgun I had purchased weeks ago. Jamal was driving an armored vehicle loaded with illegal surveillance equipment directly into my trap. I slipped out of room 12 and walked into the cold night air ready to meet him. I drove the stolen sedan to a dark dirt ridge about a quarter-mile above the automated gas station. The elevated vantage point gave me a perfect, unobstructed view of the desolate fuel pumps below. I parked behind an old rusted billboard, leaving the engine off so the vehicle would remain silent. I pulled a pair of high-powered compact binoculars from my waterproof tactical backpack and focused the lenses on the isolated station. The night was dead silent, the only illumination coming from the flickering fluorescent canopy over the rusted fuel pumps. 10 minutes later, the hum of a powerful engine shattered the quiet night air. Jamal drove his black armored SUV down the 2-lane highway at top speed and violently swerved into the station, his heavy tires screeching sharply against the cracked concrete. He did not park under the bright lights of the pumps. He instantly killed his headlights and rolled the massive vehicle into the deep shadows near the side of the permanently locked convenience store building. He stepped out of the driver's seat, moving with the fluid, calculated grace of a man who had spent his adult life navigating hostile war zones. He wore dark tactical clothing and held his suppressed pistol tightly against his chest, sweeping the barrel across the empty lot. He scanned the entire perimeter with practiced efficiency, checking the blind corners of the building, actively looking for any sign of my vehicle. Seeing nothing but empty asphalt and overgrown weeds, his attention locked onto the only 2 accessible doors on the property. The exterior public restrooms at the back of the building. I watched closely through the binoculars as he crept along the cold brick wall, expertly avoiding the pools of light cast by the flickering street lamps above. He reached the heavy metal door of the women restroom. He paused for a long moment, pressing his ear against the rusted steel frame to listen for any slight movement inside. He genuinely thought he had me completely cornered, trapped, and entirely helpless. He pictured a terrified accountant cowering behind a dirty bathroom stall, crying and waiting to die. He took a deliberate step back, raised his heavy combat boot, and kicked the door right at the lock mechanism. The metal latch snapped instantly under his immense physical strength. The heavy door flew open, slamming violently against the tiled wall inside with a deafening crash. Jamal pivoted smoothly through the doorway in a perfect tactical sweep, aiming his weapon left, then right, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He cleared the two empty stalls in mere seconds. He stood in the center of the cramped, foul-smelling room, his gun slowly lowering. The space was completely empty. There was no terrified wife shivering in the dark and begging for her life. There was only the rhythmic dripping sound of a leaky sink faucet echoing loudly in the small space. Then a bright white square of light caught his peripheral vision. He turned his broad shoulders toward the sink. Taped securely to the center of the cracked, grime-covered mirror was a brand-new burner phone. The screen was configured to stay awake, permanently glowing intensely in the dimly lit bathroom. Jamal hesitated for a second, then holstered his weapon and cautiously approached the porcelain sink. He leaned forward, squinting at the high-resolution display. What he saw on that small glowing screen hit him significantly harder than a physical bullet ever could. I had loaded a continuously scrolling document file onto the device. It was the complete, unredacted forensic financial ledger of his highly illegal private security operations. The bright screen boldly displayed the exact routing numbers of his hidden offshore bank accounts located in the Cayman Islands. It explicitly listed the specific dummy corporations he utilized to launder dirty money for his wealthy, corrupt clients. It even highlighted the exact transaction dates and the precise financial cut he had taken from a dangerous underground smuggling ring he provided armed security for last year. Every single dirty secret he had spent 5 years meticulously burying was neatly compiled on a cheap prepaid phone. Jamal ripped the device off the mirror, his breathing suddenly ragged and shallow. He was no longer a confident predator hunting an easy target. He was a deeply compromised criminal staring at his own federal indictment. Right as his thumb frantically scrolled to the bottom of the detailed financial ledger, my timing aligned perfectly. Sitting comfortably in my dark car up on the ridge, I smiled coldly in the darkness and tapped the enter key on my laptop keyboard. A text message notification instantly dropped down from the top of the burner phone screen, blocking the damning data. The final text message I sent contained only 2 simple, terrifying words. Look outside. Jamal stared at the 2 words on the glowing screen. Just look outside. The heavy silence of the bathroom was suddenly broken by a high-pitched mechanical whine coming from the parking lot. He shoved the burner phone into his tactical vest and sprinted for the door. He burst out of the shattered frame, his boots hitting the cold concrete just as a blinding flash of light erupted from the dark corner of the building. His black armored SUV, the vehicle that housed millions in illegal surveillance equipment, was consumed in a spectacular explosion. I had spent the last 10 minutes remotely bypassing the firewall of his high-end vehicle computer system. I overrode the safety protocols on the lithium-ion auxiliary battery bank he installed for his heavy servers, forcing it into a catastrophic thermal runaway. Thick smoke billowed into the night sky as a secondary explosion blew the doors off their reinforced hinges. The concussive wave knocked Jamal backward. He hit the brick wall hard, shielding his face from the intense heat. The flames illuminated his terrified expression. He watched as his expensive servers, his untraceable satellite uplinks, and his arsenal of unregistered weapons melted into a pile of useless slag. He was stranded at an abandoned gas station in the middle of nowhere. More importantly, he finally understood the terrifying reality of his situation. He was no longer the apex predator hunting a helpless civilian. He was the prey caught in a digital web spun by a woman who could dismantle his entire life from a keyboard. From my vantage point on the dark ridge, I lowered my binoculars. The blazing inferno below painted the desolate landscape in chaotic shades of orange and red. I watched Jamal scramble away from the heat, retreating deep into the shadows near the tree line. He checked his physical perimeter frantically, his pistol raised, expecting a bullet from the dark. But I am an auditor, not an assassin. I destroy my targets systematically, tearing apart their infrastructure until they have absolutely nothing left. Down in the shadows, Jamal felt his pocket vibrate. He pulled out his personal phone. The caller ID flashed Derek. Jamal stared at the screen, his chest heaving, the roaring flames reflecting in his dark eyes. He wiped the soot from his forehead and swiped to answer. "Did you find her?" Derek demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "Did you force her to unlock the trust fund?" Jamal looked at his burning vehicle. He thought about the unredacted financial ledgers currently sitting in his tactical vest. If he told Derek the truth, Derek would know that Jamal was exposed. Derek was a desperate federal agent drowning in a botched murder plot. If Derek realized Jamal was a massive federal liability, Derek might try to eliminate him to cover his own tracks. There was no loyalty among thieves, especially when the money disappeared. It was just a dead end. Jamal lied, his voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "She was not here. Someone spoofed her credit card to trigger an automated pump. It was a digital ghost." Derek cursed loudly on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, a ghost? You said your tracking tech was flawless. Get back in your car and expand the search radius right now. We only have 30 hours left before the bank disperses the $12 million to charity." "I cannot do that right now," Jamal said coldly, stepping further into the darkness to hide from the glow of his own ruin. "I hit a massive snag. I need to lay low and recalibrate my servers. Do not contact me again until I secure a new lead." Before Derek could scream out another order, Jamal ended the call and removed the battery from his phone. He threw the useless device into the tall grass. The absolute panic in Derek's voice confirmed everything Jamal feared. The FBI agent was losing control of the situation. The alliance was fracturing. Jamal realized he needed to protect himself, his hidden offshore accounts, and his own freedom. He turned his back on the burning wreckage and began the long, humiliating walk down the dark highway. Up on the dirt ridge, I smiled. The audio feed from Derek's smartwatch had captured the entire exchange perfectly. Jamal was lying to his boss, severing their communication and going rogue. My plan to divide and conquer was working flawlessly. Derek was now completely blind, cut off from his muscle, and rapidly running out of time. I gently closed my laptop, put the stolen sedan in gear, and drove away from the fire. It was time to shift my attention to the next weak link in their crumbling chain. I was finally coming for my own mother. I was finally coming for my own mother. The next afternoon, the sun shone brightly over the pristine green lawns of the Oak Ridge Country Club. Despite the absolute disaster of the morning press conference, my mother Martha refused to cancel her standing monthly luncheon. Canceling would look like an admission of guilt regarding the stolen heirlooms. Instead, she chose to play the tragic brave matriarch holding up under unimaginable grief. I watched her live on my glowing laptop screen from afar. I had easily breached the club wireless network and hijacked the dining room security cameras. Martha was wearing a black designer dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, while her wealthy socialite friends leaned in, offering their fake sympathies. She expertly deflected questions about the necklace, claiming the hackers were extortionists. She looked perfectly in control, but I knew exactly how to shatter her carefully constructed world. At exactly 1 p.m, right as the waiters began serving the main courses, a uniformed courier stepped into the dining room. I had paid him in cash with strict instructions. He approached Martha's table, holding a sleek black envelope sealed with a silver wax stamp. He asked for her signature. Martha smiled politely at her friends, acting deeply important, and signed the digital tablet. She took the thick envelope, her manicured nails picking at the silver seal. Her friends stopped eating, their eyes glued to the mysterious package. Martha probably assumed it was a card from a wealthy donor or a sympathetic local politician. She slid her hand inside and pulled out a stack of glossy, high-resolution 8x10 photographs. I zoomed in on the camera feed to watch her face. The polite smile vanished instantly. The photos were not letters of condolence. They were crystal-clear images of Derek. I had hired a private investigator 6 months ago when I first noticed the missing funds, and he had delivered spectacular results. The top photo showed Derek passionately kissing a blonde junior FBI agent outside a luxury boutique hotel downtown. The next photo showed them walking into the lobby hand in hand. The timestamps printed on the images prove these encounters happened last week when Derek claimed he was working late. Martha's face turned a sickly shade of gray. One of her nosy friends leaned over to look, but Martha frantically shoved the photos face down on the white tablecloth, her hands trembling violently. But the photos were only the appetizer. Inside the black envelope was a small digital audio player. A neon yellow sticky note was attached to it with 2 words written in bold black marker. Press play. Martha, driven by pure paranoid curiosity, picked up the small device. She pressed the play button, holding the small speaker close to her ear. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly what she was hearing. It was a crisp, clear audio recording I had captured from Derek's smartwatch just 3 days prior. He was lying in bed with his young mistress. The audio played his voice perfectly. I am telling you, baby. Once the wife is out of the picture, the 12 million is all ours, Derek said on the recording. The mistress then asked about Martha and Brianna. Derek laughed cruelly. Are you kidding me? I am not giving that greedy old hag or her bankrupt daughter a single dime. Let them drown in their own debt. I will string them along until the money clears, and then we are leaving the country. I watched the color completely drain from my mother's face. Her mouth opened in silent shock. She dropped the small audio player onto the porcelain plate. Her wealthy friends asked if she was all right, but Martha could not speak at all. The realization hit her like a freight train. She had aided in the attempted murder of her own daughter, risked spending the rest of her life in a federal prison, and destroyed her family reputation, all for absolutely nothing. Derek had played her for a complete fool. He never intended to share the wealth. He was going to take my money and abandon her. The profound humiliation and white-hot rage visibly radiated from her body. Martha stood up so fast her chair tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. She grabbed her designer handbag, leaving the sleek black envelope and the photos on the table. She quickly stormed out of the dining room without saying a single word to her bewildered friends. I closed the camera feed and leaned back against the headboard of my cheap motel bed. The second fracture was complete. Martha was furious, and she was heading straight for Derek. The ultimate family implosion was truly about to begin. The ultimate family implosion was truly about to begin. Less than an hour after the country club luncheon, my mother's silver Mercedes screeched into the driveway of my house. I was watching the live feed from the hidden camera positioned perfectly above Derek's mahogany desk in his home office. Derek was frantically typing on his computer, searching for any legal loophole to break the dead man switch on my trust fund. The heavy oak door of the office flew open with a violent crash, rebounding off the wall. Martha stormed in, her eyes blazing with a feral rage I had never seen before. Brianna was right behind her, looking frantic and confused. Derek jumped in his leather chair, instantly defensive, as he reached for the sidearm resting on his desk, before realizing who exactly it was. What are you doing here? Derek snapped, his voice sharp and aggressive. The local police are still patrolling the neighborhood. You cannot just barge in like this. Martha did not say a word. She marched straight to his desk and forcefully slammed the black envelope down. The glossy photos of Derek and his young blonde mistress scattered across the polished wood. The small digital audio player landed right on top of them. Derek stared at the photos. The color drained from his face as his arrogant facade crumbled into absolute panic. Where did you get these? Derek demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. From a courier at my country club, Martha screamed, her voice echoing through the large house. Delivered right in front of the most influential women in the city. You arrogant, lying piece of garbage. You were never going to give us our fair share of the $12 million. You were planning to take my daughter's money and run off with some cheap junior agent. Brianna pushed past our mother and grabbed one of the photos, her eyes widening in total shock. You told me the wire transfer was guaranteed. Brianna shrieked, her voice cracking. I owe dangerous people a lot of money, Derek. They are threatening to break my legs. You promised me $3 million for helping you set up Allison. Derek slammed his fists on the desk, his panic rapidly turning into cornered rage. Keep your voices down, he hissed through clenched teeth. Do you want the police outside to hear you confessing to murder? Allison is alive. She set us up. She locked the trust fund behind an impenetrable legal wall, and she is the one sending these packages. She is trying to turn us against each other. It does not matter who sent them, Martha countered coldly, crossing her arms over her chest. What matters is that we now have absolute proof of your intent to defraud us. We took a massive federal risk for you, Derek. We stood in that living room and watched Jamal go upstairs with a loaded gun. We lied on national television this morning, and we did it because you promised us a massive financial payout? Derek let out a bitter, mocking laugh. You did it because you are greedy parasites. You hated Allison just as much as I did. You wanted her gone. Do not act like you have the moral high ground here, Martha. Martha leaned over the desk, invading his personal space, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. I do not care about the moral high ground, she whispered venomously. I care about my compensation. You are going to pay us, Derek. You are going to wire $3 million into my offshore account by 6 o'clock tonight. Derek threw his hands up in total exasperation. I just told you the trust fund is completely locked. I do not have $3 million. I do not even have $300,000 right now. My assets are tied up. Then you better figure it out quickly, Brianna yelled, slamming her hand against the wall. Sell this house. Liquidate your retirement portfolio. Call in favors from your corrupt federal buddies. I do not care how you get the cash, but you are going to pay us what you promised. And if I completely refuse? Derek challenged his hand, inching much closer to the heavy pistol sitting on his desk. What exactly are you two going to do about it? Martha smiled, but it was a chilling, dead expression. If the money is not in my account by 6 o'clock, Brianna and I will march straight down to the local police precinct. We will tell the lead detectives that the entire kidnapping was a staged cover-up. We will testify that you hired Jamal to murder Allison for her inheritance. We get immunity for cooperating, and you get the death penalty for capital murder. The choice is yours, Derek. The choice is yours, Derek. Those final venomous words from my mother echoed through my noise-canceling headphones. I sat perfectly still in the freezing darkness of a rented climate-controlled server room on the outskirts of the city. I had abandoned the cheap motel, needing the high-speed fiber optic connection this facility offered to securely download the audio files. The blinking blue and green lights from the server racks cast shadows across my face. I reached out and tapped the spacebar, pausing the audio feed. I took a long, deep breath. I finally had it. The absolute, undeniable proof of the entire conspiracy. Months ago, before I knew about his violent intentions, I noticed Derek making strange, unexplained withdrawals from our joint checking account. As a forensic accountant, my instincts immediately flared. I bought him a heavy gold Rolex for our anniversary. He loved the status symbol so much he never took it off. He had no idea that I had hollowed out a tiny section behind the watch face and installed a military-grade micro-audio transmitter. The battery life was designed to last a year, and the microphone was sensitive. It was currently transmitting the sound of his rapid, panicked breathing directly to my encrypted server. I pressed play again, listening as the standoff in the home office continued. Derek was trapped. You are insane if you think you can walk into a police precinct and negotiate immunity. Derek growled, his voice trembling with rage. The local detectives will not protect you. They will lock you in an interrogation room and charge you as accessories to a federal crime before you can finish your sentence. You hired a hitman. I did not hire anyone, Martha shot back instantly, her tone cold and unyielding. You hired Jamal. I was merely a bystander who was lied to by a federal agent. Brianna can corroborate my story. We are two terrified women who were manipulated by a corrupt law enforcement officer. Who do you think a jury will believe, Derek? An aging widow and a struggling young mother, or the man with an offshore bank account and a young mistress? The silence that followed was heavy. Derek knew she was right. Juries love a sympathetic narrative, and Martha was a master of playing the victim. Fine. Derek finally hissed the sound of his heavy leather chair squeaking as he collapsed into it. Give me until 8 o'clock tonight. 6 o'clock is impossible. I have to liquidate a major asset and route it through a clean shell company so the financial regulators do not flag the transaction. 8 o'clock, Brianna said sharply, her voice devoid of warmth. Not 1 minute later? Or we make the phone call and end your career. I heard the rhythmic clicking of their designer heels as my mother and sister turned and marched out of the home office. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, vibrating the microphone hidden inside the Rolex. The house fell silent again. I listened to Derek let out a long, ragged exhale. He slammed his fist down on the wooden desk, shouting a string of curses into the empty room. He was a desperate animal backed into a corner, and his next move would be his most dangerous. I watched the audio waveform on my screen level out as his shouting finally stopped. I highlighted the entire 60-minute recording. This was not just a piece of leverage. This was a lethal digital weapon. The file contained a full confession of attempted murder, financial extortion, and systemic corruption. I initiated a secure, automated backup protocol. I duplicated the high-definition audio file and sent encrypted copies to 3 separate decentralized cloud servers located in 3 different countries. I also embedded the original file into a heavily hidden partition on my physical hard drive. I wanted to make absolutely sure that even if Derek somehow found me and put a bullet in my head, this recording would survive to utterly destroy him. I took off my headphones and rubbed my tired eyes. Hearing my own mother casually discuss my murder as a bargaining chip for a massive payday was a deep wound that would never fully heal. But the sharp pain in my chest only hardened my cold resolve. They had willingly thrown away every single ounce of humanity they possessed for the hollow promise of a $12 million payout. Now I was going to use their own reckless greed to lock them in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their natural lives. I opened a new secure browser window and quickly navigated to the highly monitored whistleblower portal for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was time to formally introduce my husband to his worst nightmare. It was time to formally introduce my husband to his worst nightmare. I stared at the stark blue and gold seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation glowing on my laptop screen. The whistleblower portal was designed for highly sensitive internal leaks. Most people would have rushed to the local police precinct with that explosive audio recording, but my forensic background taught me to analyze the entire board first. The local authorities were already compromised by Derek and his carefully cultivated hero persona. If I walked into a precinct today, the evidence would miraculously disappear from the evidence locker and I would end up permanently institutionalized under a psychiatric hold. I needed a much bigger, much heavier hammer. I needed the Office of Professional Responsibility. The OPR is the Internal Affairs Division of the FBI. They do not care about Derek having a stellar local reputation or his charming smile. They care exclusively about federal statutes, conspiracy to commit murder, and financial extortion. I navigated through the encrypted submission form using a heavily anonymized virtual private network, routed through multiple proxy servers in Eastern Europe. I carefully attached the pristine 60-minute audio file containing my mother, my sister, and my husband discussing my planned assassination and the illegal distribution of my $12 million trust fund. But I did not click send. Not yet. If the OPR received the file right now, they would immediately dispatch a team to arrest Derek. While satisfying in the short term, it would leave Brianna and Martha pointing fingers, plea bargaining out of a lengthy prison sentence by claiming Derek coerced them. I wanted them all to suffer the absolute maximum penalty under federal law. Furthermore, I needed Derek desperate enough to lead me to the absolute bottom of this dangerous conspiracy. He still owed dangerous people a massive amount of money. I needed to know exactly who was pulling his strings before I blew up his entire world. Instead of an immediate upload, I wrote a custom execution script on my terminal. I tied the encrypted email package to an automated secure server. I set a highly specific countdown timer. The audio file, along with the high-resolution photographs of his affair and the financial ledgers I had pulled on Jamal, would be transmitted directly to the director of the OPR in exactly 48 hours. A small digital clock appeared in the top right corner of my dark screen. 47 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. The countdown had officially begun. This was my ultimate insurance policy. If Derek managed to find me and silence me before the clock ran out, the automated server would still execute the command flawlessly. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal supermax prison, regardless of whether I was alive to testify against him in court. But if I survived, the timer gave me exactly 2 days to bring the entire family together for one final devastating reckoning. I leaned back in the freezing server room, watching the red numbers constantly ticking down. My husband was officially living on borrowed time. My mother and sister were demanding $3 million by 8 o'clock tonight, unaware their own words would seal their indictments. The pressure on Derek was mounting to an unbearable degree. I switched my screen back to the live camera feed in his home office. Derek was pacing like a caged animal. He had his burner phone pressed tightly to his ear, his face pale and covered in cold sweat. He was frantically dialing numbers, trying to secure a massive shadow loan, but no legitimate or illegitimate bank would approve a $3 million wire transfer in a matter of hours for a man under investigation. He slammed the phone down onto his desk, shattering the expensive glass paperweight I had bought him for his birthday last year. He walked over to his large floor safe hidden behind a heavy mahogany bookshelf. He rapidly spun the brass dial, yanked the heavy metal door open, and pulled out a thick stack of emergency cash and a second unregistered firearm. He racked the slide of the gun, his eyes hollow and perfectly desperate. I knew exactly what was racing through his mind. He could not pay Martha and Brianna. He could not access my trust fund. He was trapped in a financial web of his own making. When a predator is cornered with no way out, they turn on their own pack. Derek realized that the only way to silence the blackmailers and protect his federal career was to eliminate the loose ends. And the biggest, most dangerous loose end of all was his hired muscle. He needed to get rid of Jamal tonight before the sun finally came up. I calmly watched Derek pick up his burner phone. He rapidly dialed the secure number for Jamal, untraceable prepaid device, the one Jamal likely bought right after his armored SUV was reduced to a pile of burning metal. The phone rang 3 times before Jamal answered. The audio was thick with static. "What do you want?" Jamal asked, his voice rough and guarded. "I told you not to call me until I had my servers back online." Derek forced a desperate, breathless tone into his voice. He was a master of playing the frantic victim. "I found her." Derek lied perfectly. "I found Allison. She slipped up. She tried to access a secondary safety deposit box downtown, but my federal red flags caught the ping. She is hiding out at the old maritime shipping yard on the south side. She has the primary physical security token for the trust fund right there with her. If we get that token, I can force the bank to override the dead man switch, and we get the $12 million. Jamal was silent for a long moment. I knew exactly what he was calculating. He had the unredacted ledgers proving his illegal operations, and he knew I was the one who left them at the gas station. He knew I was highly capable and incredibly dangerous. But the lure of $12 million combined with his urgent need for cash to replace his destroyed equipment was a powerful motivator. "Are you sure it is her?" Jamal asked suspiciously. "I am positive," Derek insisted. "But she is spooked. She is hiding deep in the maze of empty cargo containers. I cannot go in alone. If the local police spot my federal vehicle, I am completely ruined. I need your tactical experience, Jamal. Meet me at Pier number 4 in 30 minutes. Bring your weapon. We end this tonight." Jamal agreed and hung up. I watched Derek drop the burner phone onto his desk. The frantic, desperate expression vanished from his face instantly. It was replaced by a cold, soulless stare. He checked the magazine of his unregistered pistol, slid it into his shoulder holster, and grabbed the thick stack of emergency cash. He was not bringing the money to pay Jamal. He was bringing it to facilitate his own escape after he dumped his brother-in-law into the freezing harbor. I closed the video feed. The final stage of their alliance was collapsing into violence exactly as I had orchestrated. Derek was heading to the South Side shipping yard to murder Jamal, and Jamal was walking right into the trap. But I could not let them handle this in private. If Derek killed Jamal quietly, I would lose my most valuable piece of leverage against the rest of the family. I needed to document the betrayal. I needed the final nails for their federal coffins. I quickly packed my laptop, my high-definition camera, and my parabolic microphone into my tactical bag. I left the freezing server room and climbed back into my stolen sedan. The drive to the South Side was tense and quiet. The city was asleep, completely unaware of the deadly game unfolding in its shadows. The maritime shipping yard was a sprawling, rusted graveyard of international commerce. Towering metal cranes loomed like massive metal skeletons against the cloudy night sky. Rows upon rows of corrugated steel shipping containers created a dark, confusing labyrinth. There were no security guards, no active cameras, and absolutely no witnesses. It was the perfect place for a federal agent to make a problem disappear. I parked my car a half-mile away, hiding it behind an abandoned warehouse. I moved through the shadows on foot, the cold wind whipping off the dark water. I navigated the maze of containers with careful precision. I needed high ground. I found a rusted maintenance ladder attached to the side of a massive decommissioned loading crane. I climbed quietly, ascending 40 feet into the air until I reached the small operator cabin overlooking Pier Number 4. I set up my equipment in the dark, pointing the long lens of my camera directly at the empty concrete dock below. 10 minutes later, a dark sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the pier. Derek stepped out, his hand resting casually inside his jacket near his holster. He looked around the desolate yard, waiting for his prey. 5 minutes after that, Jamal emerged from the shadows between two shipping containers. He was moving silently, his own weapon drawn and held tightly at his side. The two desperate men faced each other under the pale moonlight. The ultimate confrontation was finally about to begin. The cold wind howled off the dark water, whipping Derek's jacket around his waist as he took a slow, calculated step forward. He kept his right hand hovering dangerously close to the grip of his holstered weapon. Jamal stood perfectly still, his stance wide and balanced, his heavy pistol already drawn and pointed directly at Derek's chest. The silence stretched between them, thick with paranoia and impending violence. "Where is she?" Jamal demanded, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the crashing waves. "You said she was hiding in the containers. I do not see a single sign of life out here." Derek forced a tight, artificial smile. "She is deep inside. I told you she is spooked." "Put the gun down, Jamal. We are on the same side. We need to go in there together and flush her out before she realizes we tracked her down." Jamal did not lower his weapon a single inch. "You are lying, Derek. You have been lying since the moment you handed me that suppressed pistol in your kitchen. There is no trace of her here. You brought me out to this abandoned pier to put a bullet in the back of your own accomplice tonight." Up in the operator cabin of the towering crane, I adjusted the dial on my parabolic microphone. The highly sensitive dish captured their voices with terrifying clarity, transmitting the crisp audio directly to my encrypted laptop. I watched through the long lens of my camera, my finger resting gently on the record button. They were doing exactly what I needed them to do. They were dissecting their own conspiracy out in the open. Derek scoffed, crossing his arms in a fake display of relaxed confidence. "Why would I want to kill you? You are the only muscle I have left. We need to secure that physical security token so I can override the trust fund. Think about the $12 million, Jamal. We are so close to the finish line." Jamal let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "There is no finish line and there is no money. I went to that gas station tonight, Derek. I kicked down the door expecting to find a terrified accountant. Instead, I found a burner phone taped to the mirror. Do you know what was on that phone? It was the complete, unredacted financial ledger of every single private security contract I have executed over the last 5 years. She has my offshore routing numbers. She has my shell companies. She even has the transaction receipts from the smuggling ring I protected last summer. Derek froze. His artificial smile vanished, replaced by genuine shock. What are you talking about? How could she possibly have that kind of classified intel? Because she is a senior forensic accountant? Jamal roared, his professional composure finally breaking. She makes her living hunting down hidden assets for massive corporations. We thought she was just a clueless wife. She played us both. Right after I read that file, she hacked into my armored SUV and blew it to pieces. I lost millions in surveillance gear tonight. She is not hiding in these containers, Derek. She is hunting us. Derek took another step forward, his hand finally gripping the handle of his gun. If she has your files, then you are a massive federal liability. You are walking evidence. And you are a broke federal agent who owes dangerous people a lot of cash. Jamal shot back, gripping his pistol tighter with both hands. I know you do not have the $3 million you promised Brianna and Martha. I know you cannot access the trust fund. You lured me out here because you are drowning and you thought cutting me loose would buy you some time. You greedy idiot! Derek hissed, pulling his unregistered firearm from his shoulder holster and aiming it squarely at Jamal's head. You brought this entirely on yourself. If you had just done your job and killed her in the attic, we would be sitting on a beach right now, but you let her slip away. You let her lock the accounts. Now my own wife is blackmailing my entire family, and I have nothing left to pay my debts. I zoomed the camera lens in tightly, capturing the furious expressions on both of their faces. The audio recording was flawless. Derek had just confessed to orchestrating the hit in the attic, acknowledging that Jamal was the hired assassin. The final pieces of the federal indictment were locked into my encrypted hard drive. Jamal sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. You are not walking away from this pier, Derek. I am taking that emergency cash out of your jacket and I am leaving the country tonight. Derek cocked his heavy gun. Before either man could pull their trigger, a blinding beam of white light swept across the concrete pier. The sudden glare illuminated the rusted shipping containers and cast long, distorted shadows of the two men against the metal walls. A massive black SUV with heavily tinted windows roared down the center lane of the shipyard. Its engine growled like a caged beast before it slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt just 50 feet away from their standoff. Derek shielded his eyes, keeping his gun raised, but shifting his aim toward the vehicle. Jamal stepped back, using a metal crate for partial cover. The heavy doors of the SUV swung open simultaneously. 3 men stepped out into the freezing wind. 2 of them were massive, built like linebackers, wearing tactical gear with no insignias and carrying fully automatic rifles. The 3rd man, stepping out from the passenger side, wore a pristine tailored suit that looked entirely out of place in the grimy maritime yard. I adjusted the zoom on my camera lens, my heart pounding in my chest. The man in the suit was Special Agent in Charge Harrison. He was Derek's direct supervisor at the Federal Bureau. He was the man who had supposedly assigned Derek to the undercover operation that night. But Harrison was not here to conduct an official federal raid. The men flanking him were not law enforcement. They held their weapons with the relaxed, ruthless posture of cartel enforcers. Harrison calmly buttoned his suit jacket and walked slowly toward the 2 men, completely ignoring the guns pointed in his general direction. Put the weapons down, Harrison ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Both of you are making a massive mess. Derek lowered his pistol slightly, his face twisting in complete confusion. Boss, what are you doing here? Derek asked, his voice shaking. How did you know where to find me? Harrison stopped 10 feet away. He did not look at Derek. He looked directly at Jamal. Jamal kept his gun leveled at Derek, refusing to back down. I track his federal vehicle, Harrison said smoothly. You have caused a lot of problems tonight, Derek. Our friends south of the border are running out of patience. You promised them the $10 million by midnight tomorrow. You assured me your wife would be dead, and the trust fund would be completely under your control by now. Jamal slowly lowered his gun, his eyes widening as he stared at Derek. $10 million, Jamal repeated, his voice filled with venom. You told Brianna and Martha you needed the money to pay off some local bookies. You owe $10 million to a Mexican cartel. Derek swallowed hard, taking a trembling step backward. I can fix this, Harrison. Derek pleaded, the arrogant federal agent completely replaced by a terrified, desperate man. Allison threw a wrench in the plan. She instituted a dead man switch on the accounts. But if we find her, I can force her to reverse it. Up in the crane cabin, I gripped the edge of the metal console. The final piece of the puzzle violently clicked into place. The entire conspiracy was never about sharing wealth with my mother or my sister. It was never about paying off Brianna debts. Derek had stolen from the cartel, and he was using my murder to save his own skin. He had dragged his own family into a cartel assassination plot, promising them millions he never intended to give them, because every single cent of my trust fund was earmarked for his own survival. Harrison shook his head, looking at Derek with absolute disgust. You do not get to fix this, Derek. You brought an amateur private security contractor into a cartel operation. You let your target escape. And now you are out here pointing a gun at the only muscle you have left. The bosses are done waiting for your domestic disputes to resolve. They want their money, or they want your head in a duffel bag. Jamal barked a harsh laugh. You are a dead man, Derek. You played all of us, and now the cartel is going to skin you alive. Harrison turned his cold gaze to Jamal. Do not laugh, contractor. You know too much about our internal operations now. You are not walking away from this pier either. The two cartel enforcers raised their automatic rifles, pointing them directly at Jamal and Derek. The metallic clack of the rifles chambering their rounds echoed across the dark water. The deadly standoff had just escalated into a brutal execution. My highly sensitive microphone recorded every single damning word of the cartel admission, perfectly securing the federal evidence. I had finally captured my ultimate undeniable proof, effectively destroying all their carefully crafted lies. Harrison raised his hand, pointing a single finger directly at Derek. Do it, Harrison commanded coldly. Make it clean. We dump the bodies in the harbor and tell the local field office that Derek vanished during an undercover sting. The two massive cartel enforcers stepped forward, raising the heavy barrels of their automatic rifles. Derek collapsed onto his knees, dropping his pistol onto the cold concrete. He held his hands up, tears streaming down his face, begging for a mercy that Harrison did not possess. Beside him, Jamal did not beg. He kept his eyes locked on the enforcers, his muscles tense, preparing to make one final desperate lunge before the bullets tore him apart. Up in the freezing crane cabin, my heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I had the recording. I had everything I needed to destroy them. The logical move was to sit quietly, let the cartel execute the men who wanted me dead, and walk away clean. But my forensic mind instantly processed the massive legal flaw in that scenario. If Derek died tonight on this abandoned pier, he would not die a disgraced criminal. He would die an active federal agent. The FBI would cover up Harrison's involvement to prevent a catastrophic public relations scandal. Derek would be buried with full honors. He would become a martyred hero. Worse than that, his death would leave my legal status completely unresolved. I would remain a missing person permanently tied to a violent home invasion. The bank would freeze my trust fund indefinitely, tying it up in decades of federal probate court. I could not let the cartel give Derek a quick, painless exit. I needed him alive. I needed him to face the devastating reality of his own actions when the timer on my automated email ran out. I carefully set my recording equipment down on the metal floor. I reached deep into my waterproof tactical bag and pulled out the heavy matte black rifle I had purchased from a dark web arms dealer weeks ago. I had never fired a weapon at a human being, and I had no intention of starting tonight. But I understood basic mechanics and the explosive power of high-velocity ammunition. I rested the heavy barrel of the rifle on the rusted window frame of the cabin. I peered through the thermal scope, bypassing the men standing on the pier. I locked the crosshairs directly onto the massive front grille of the black SUV Harrison had arrived in. The thermal imaging showed the engine block glowing a bright, intense white against the cold night air. The vehicle was packed with combustible fluids and a high-capacity alternator. Down on the pier, the enforcers placed their fingers on their triggers. Derek squeezed his eyes shut. I took a deep breath, held it steady, and pulled the trigger. The heavy recoil slammed into my shoulder. The deafening crack of the rifle shot ripped through the silent shipyard. The high-caliber bullet tore completely through the metal grille of the massive SUV, striking the pressurized fuel lines and the hot engine block simultaneously. The result was instantaneous and violently chaotic. The front end of the SUV exploded in a blinding fireball of white-hot sparks and thick black smoke. The concussive blast knocked Harrison backward off his feet. The two cartel enforcers violently flinched instinctively, turning their weapons away from Derek and firing wildly into the dark maze of shipping containers, desperately searching for the unseen sniper. Jamal reacted with the pure instinct of a trained survivalist. The second the explosion illuminated the pier, he dove sideways, rolling behind a stack of wooden pallets. He did not bother firing back. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted headlong into the labyrinth of dark steel containers, vanishing completely into the shadows. Derek opened his eyes, realizing he was not dead. He saw Harrison struggling to stand up beside the burning wreckage of the vehicle. Derek grabbed his discarded pistol from the concrete, scrambled to his feet, and ran faster than he ever had in his entire life. He sprinted toward his unmarked federal sedan, parked at the edge of the pier. Bullets from the enforcers pinged wildly against the pavement around him, but their aim was completely blinded by the thick smoke pouring from the destroyed SUV. Derek threw himself into the driver's seat, cranked the engine, and slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The sedan tires smoked against the concrete as he violently reversed, spun the steering wheel, and sped out of the shipyard, leaving Harrison shouting furiously in his rearview mirror. I broke down the rifle and packed my gear. I saved my husband, not out of love, but because I had reserved a much colder, much darker cage for him. I carried my heavy tactical bag down the rusted metal ladder of the crane, my muscles burning from the adrenaline crash. I slipped back through the labyrinth of shipping containers, moving silently past the distant sound of approaching police sirens. The local authorities were finally responding to the explosion, but I was already miles away in my stolen sedan. I drove back to my freezing server room on the outskirts of the city. It was time to weave the final thread of my digital web. I plugged my laptop back into the high-speed network and immediately uploaded the flawless audio recording of the shipyard standoff. I now had hard proof of the cartel debt. But as a forensic accountant, I knew that simply exposing a dirty federal agent to internal affairs might just end with a quiet plea deal and a 10-year sentence in a minimum security prison. Derek would manipulate the system, claiming he was coerced by Harrison. I needed to elevate his crime from corruption to treason. I opened a heavily encrypted virtual machine and accessed the dark web financial networks. Using the routing numbers Jamal had gathered on Derek during their brief partnership, I mapped my husband's offshore financial footprint. He had 3 primary shell companies registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. He used these to hide the bribes he took and to funnel payments toward his massive cartel debt. I downloaded the raw transactional ledgers and opened my specialized forensic editing software. I was going to rewrite history. I started by isolating the large wire transfers Derek had attempted to make to his cartel handlers. I did not delete them. Instead, I carefully altered the digital destination signatures. I rerouted the paper trail of his dirty money connecting his Cyprus shell companies directly to known financial fronts used by foreign intelligence services. I specifically chose flagged accounts that the United States Treasury Department had explicitly sanctioned for funding global terrorism. But a paper trail needs a compelling narrative to convince a federal judge. I needed to fabricate the product Derek was supposedly selling. I accessed the secure server I had built into our home network months ago. Derek frequently brought his classified work laptop home, carelessly connecting it to our shared wireless network. During those careless evenings, I had quietly mirrored his hard drive. I extracted heavily redacted cover sheets of highly classified FBI operational reports and appended them to the fabricated financial transactions. I manipulated the metadata to make it look like Derek was actively transmitting these top-secret documents to foreign buyers in exchange for cryptocurrency deposits. I meticulously wove his real cartel debts with this fabricated espionage evidence. According to the new digital reality I was creating, Derek was a radicalized rogue federal agent actively selling the names of undercover United States assets to foreign terrorists. To seal the trap completely, I linked the failed attempt on my life to this new narrative. I drafted a fake encrypted email from Derek's secure address to one of the sanctioned terror accounts. In the email, I wrote that his wife had discovered the treasonous document transfers and needed to be eliminated immediately to protect the international supply chain. I made it look like the hit in the attic was a calculated assassination ordered to silence a patriotic whistleblower. Treason, espionage, terrorism. These were the magic words that activated the terrifying weight of the American federal government. They would never offer him a quiet plea deal or a comfortable cell in a minimum security prison. Instead, they would lock him in a concrete box at the Supermax facility in Colorado for the remainder of his life. If they believed he was actively selling classified intelligence to terrorists, they would send an armed tactical strike team to completely destroy his world. I finished compiling the massive dossier. It was a masterpiece of forensic manipulation, a flawless blend of genuine audio evidence and masterfully doctored financial data. I securely attached this new devastating payload to the automated email I had scheduled to send to the FBI director. The red digital countdown clock on my screen showed exactly 36 hours remaining, but Derek was a cornered animal. After the disaster at the shipyard, he would be desperate to flee the country. I could not risk him slipping through the cracks and disappearing before the timer expired. I needed to force the Bureau to act immediately, initiating a nationwide manhunt. I bypassed the automated timer for a single piece of evidence. I logged into an untraceable public email server and sent the fabricated wire transfer receipt linking Derek's federal badge number directly to a known terrorist financier. I sent it to Homeland Security and flagged it with the highest possible priority code. The final bait was set. But while the massive federal machine slowly geared up to dismantle my husband, the Mexican cartel was already moving with terrifying speed. Harrison and his bosses were not going to wait for Homeland Security to audit Derek. They needed to send a loud, violent message to their rogue agent. Sitting in the freezing server room, I kept my parabolic audio feeds active, scanning the local radio frequencies and the cloned data streams from Derek's remaining devices. That is when I intercepted a brief, heavily encrypted text message routed through Harrison's burner network. It contained a single residential address and an order to acquire collateral. The address belonged to my sister Brianna. The cartel enforcers from the shipyard were heading straight for her suburban condominium to kidnap her. They intended to torture her to force Derek to hand over the $10 million he owed them. As much as I despised my sister for willingly plotting my murder and stealing from our own mother, I am not a monster. I wanted Brianna to spend decades rotting in a federal penitentiary, thinking about her unimaginable greed. I did not want her chopped into pieces and stuffed into a rusted oil drum by international drug runners. Furthermore, I absolutely needed her alive to stand trial when the Office of Professional Responsibility finally cracked the case wide open. I had to intervene, but I could not expose myself. I opened a secure voice over Internet Protocol application on my laptop. I routed the call through a dozen international servers to completely mask my physical location. I dialed the direct emergency dispatch line for the local police department. I utilized a digital voice modulation filter, dropping my pitch to sound like a frantic, deep-voiced neighbor. I reported that several heavily armed Hispanic men wearing tactical gear were currently kicking in the back door of Brianna's residence. To ensure a massive, overwhelming tactical response, I added one crucial detail. I told the dispatcher that the homeowner was a known associate of a private security contractor who illegally hoarded unregistered automatic firearms and explosive materials in the basement. That specific combination of keywords was absolute magic. In a post-terrorism era, mentioning heavily armed men and unregistered explosives triggers an immediate maximum force response. Within 4 minutes, I hacked into the city traffic cameras and watched 3 armored SWAT vehicles tear down the avenue toward Brianna's upscale neighborhood. The cartel enforcers had just pulled their black SUV into her dark driveway. They were walking toward her front porch with their suppressed weapons drawn. Suddenly, the quiet residential street exploded with blinding police spotlights and deafening sirens. The enforcers realized instantly they were walking into a massive trap. They abandoned the hit, sprinting back to their vehicle and speeding away into the night, narrowly avoiding the barricade of heavily armed tactical officers pouring onto the manicured lawn. Through the hacked street camera, I watched the SWAT team breach Brianna's front door with a heavy steel battering ram. The camera did not have audio, but the visual was spectacular. 10 minutes later, officers dragged my sister out onto the cold pavement. She was wearing her expensive silk pajamas, sobbing hysterically and shivering in the night air. The cartel had failed to kidnap her, but my anonymous tip had worked perfectly in another way. The police had completely torn apart her house to neutralize the bomb threat I fabricated. During their aggressive search, they discovered exactly what I knew they would find. Jamal had used his own basement as a staging ground for his illegal weapons smuggling operations. He had stored crates of unregistered combat rifles, high-capacity magazines, and stolen tactical body armor behind a false wall in their laundry room. Because Jamal had fled the shipyard and vanished into the night, Brianna was the only person left in the house. Under the law, she was in direct possession of a massive illegal arsenal. I watched with profound satisfaction as a uniformed officer forcefully pinned her arms behind her back and clamped heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. Brianna screamed and thrashed desperately, looking around the empty street for Derek or her missing husband to save her. But she was entirely alone. They shoved her roughly into the back of a brightly lit police cruiser. The heavy metal door slammed shut, locking her inside the criminal justice system she thought she could easily outsmart. The family was rapidly crumbling. Derek was a terrified fugitive marked for death by the cartel. Jamal was a rogue asset on the run. Brianna was now sitting in a cold jail cell, facing severe federal weapons charges. My mother was completely isolated and drowning in paranoia. The board was perfectly set for the final strike. I smiled quietly. I smiled quietly in the cold server room, but my work was not quite finished. While Brianna was being processed in a local jail cell, Derek was driving frantically through the dark city streets. He had narrowly escaped the cartel at the shipping yard, but he was completely broke and running out of time. His unmarked federal vehicle was his only lifeline. I watched his GPS tracker moving toward the downtown district. He was heading straight for the regional FBI field office. He was desperate enough to try and access his secure locker, hoping to grab emergency operational funds or his service weapons. It was a foolish, panicked move. I had already sent the fabricated wire transfer receipt, linking his federal badge number directly to a known terrorist financier. Homeland Security does not wait for morning coffee to act on a high-priority terrorism tip. I switched my monitor to the exterior security cameras of the federal building. I had piggybacked on their external feed months ago during a routine penetration test. Derek parked his sedan 2 blocks away, keeping to the shadows. He pulled his jacket collar up against the freezing wind and walked briskly to the secure rear employee entrance. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes wide with paranoia. He pulled his federal identification badge from his belt and swiped it against the magnetic reader next to the heavy reinforced door. The scanner beeped a harsh, flat tone. The light above the handle flashed red. Access denied. Derek frowned, assuming it was a simple system error. He aggressively swiped the badge a second time. Red light. He punched his secure personal identification number into the keypad. The small digital screen blinked with a terrifying message. Credential revoked. Please contact the Office of Professional Responsibility immediately. He stumbled backward as if the door had physically struck him. The reality of his situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. He was no longer an active agent. He was a suspect. He retreated into the dark alley adjacent to the building, pulling out his burner phone with trembling hands. He quickly opened his secure banking application, trying to access the offshore accounts he used to hide his bribe money. The loading circle spun for a few seconds before a stark white warning filled the screen. All assets frozen under federal review. My digital trap had snapped shut with flawless precision. Homeland Security and the FBI Internal Affairs Division were already tearing his entire life apart. He was officially a man without a country, without a badge, and without a single dollar to his name. And he knew the cartel was actively hunting him down. Derek looked at his unmarked federal sedan parked down the street. He realized with a sudden jolt of terror that the vehicle was equipped with an internal federal tracking system. If Internal Affairs had revoked his badge, they were definitely tracking his car. He could not go back to it. He was stranded in the freezing alley. He sprinted down the block, moving away from the federal building. Outside a small 24-hour diner, a tired delivery driver had left his compact car idling at the curb while he ran inside to grab a food order. Derek did not hesitate. The desperate law enforcement officer had officially crossed the line into common criminality. He yanked the driver's side door open, slid behind the wheel, and slammed the car into gear. He sped away from the curb just as the delivery driver ran out of the diner shouting. Sitting in my server room, I tracked the stolen vehicle through the city traffic cameras. I knew exactly where he was going. He had absolutely nowhere else to run. During our marriage, I had discovered a hollow space beneath the hardwood floorboards in his home office. He thought it was his ultimate secret stash. He kept 2 fake passports, a prepaid satellite phone, and $50,000 in vacuum-sealed cash hidden there for absolute emergencies. He was driving back to our suburban mansion, the very house where he had ordered my murder just 48 hours ago. He was going back to the scene of the crime to grab his escape fund before fleeing the country forever. I calmly packed my laptop into my tactical bag for the final time. The isolated server room had served its purpose. The digital phase of my revenge was completely finished. It was time for the physical confrontation. I walked out to my own stolen sedan and started the engine. The countdown timer for the massive evidence dump to the FBI director was ticking down to its final hours, but I was going to beat the clock. I was going to meet my husband at home to personally deliver his final audit. I parked the stolen sedan 2 blocks away from my own house, letting the engine die quietly in the dark. The sprawling suburban mansion looked peaceful from the outside, a stark contrast to the nightmare it had become. I slipped through the backyard using hedges for cover and approached the side entrance. I heard the squeal of tires. The stolen delivery car Derek had taken swerved recklessly into the driveway. He jumped out, leaving the driver door wide open, and sprinted toward the front door. He fumbled with his keys, throwing his body weight against the heavy wood to get inside. I quietly unlocked the side door and stepped into the dark laundry room. I did not turn on any lights. I moved silently down the hallway, stopping just outside the open door of the home office. Inside, Derek was frantically tearing the expensive Persian rug away from the center of the room. He dropped to his knees, his fingernails clawing at the wooden floorboards to reveal the brass dial of his hidden safe. He was completely out of breath, muttering panicked curses to himself. Before he could finish inputting the combination, the front door violently slammed open again. The sharp clicking of heels echoed through the foyer. My mother Martha marched straight into the house. Right behind her was Brianna. My sister looked absolutely terrible. She was still wearing her silk pajamas, but they were wrinkled and stained with dirt from her arrest. Martha had clearly just bailed her out of the county jail using whatever emergency funds she had left. Brianna was trembling with a mixture of profound trauma and boiling rage. They stormed directly into the home office, catching Derek right as the heavy metal door of the floor safe clicked open. "Do not even think about running away," Martha screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "My daughter was just humiliated and thrown into a concrete cell because of the illegal weapons you brought into her home. You owe us that cash, Derek." Derek grabbed the thick stacks of vacuum-sealed $100 bills from the dark hole, clutching the $50,000 against his chest like a lifeline. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild and sunken. "I do not owe you anything," he yelled back, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "The Federal Bureau just revoked my badge. They froze every single account I have. This cash is my only way out of the country. The cartel is coming to kill me tonight." As the word cartel left his mouth, a heavy, dragging footstep echoed from the hallway right behind me. I pressed my back tightly against the wall, slipping into the deep shadows of the adjoining dining room. Jamal limped past me, completely ignoring my presence in the dark. His tactical vest was scorched and torn from the explosion at the shipping yard. His left arm hung limply at his side, dripping blood onto my expensive hardwood floors. He stepped into the open doorway of the home office, raising his pistol with his good hand and pointing it squarely at his face. "Put the cash on the desk, Derek." Jamal growled, his voice a dangerous rasp. "You set me up to die on that pier. You owe the cartel $10 million, and you thought you could offer them my life to balance your ledger. I am taking that cash, and I am taking your emergency passports." Brianna shrieked loudly, seeing her own husband covered in thick blood and pointing a gun at Derek. Jamal put the gun down. She cried hysterically. "The police raided our house. They found the armory. I am facing federal weapons charges. We need that money for a defense attorney." Jamal did not even look at his wife. He kept his cold gaze locked on Derek. "There is no defense attorney, Brianna," he said coldly. "The federal government has our offshore routing numbers. We are completely ruined. I am leaving the country tonight, and anyone who tries to stop me is catching a bullet." Martha grabbed a heavy bronze bookend from the nearest shelf, holding it up like a primitive weapon. "We risked everything for this family," she shrieked, her greedy facade fully shattering into absolute madness. "I will not let you take what rightfully belongs to us." The four of them stood in a tight circle in the center of the ruined office. A corrupt federal agent, a bloodied mercenary, a greedy sister, and a desperate mother. They were a pack of starving vultures circling a miserable, inadequate pile of cash, violently ready to tear each other apart for the scraps. None of them realized the small amount of money in that safe could never save them from the massive federal storm I had just summoned. None of them realized the small amount of money in that safe could never save them from the massive federal storm I had just summoned. Suddenly, the heavy velvet curtains of the home office were illuminated by a blinding flashing array of red and blue lights. The intense strobe effect cut through the dark room, painting their terrified faces in alternating colors. A low, rhythmic vibration rattled the crystal glasses in the adjoining dining room cabinet. It was the distinct heavy rumble of multiple armored diesel engines surrounding the property. Jamal reacted first. His survival instincts kicked in, overriding his immediate greed. He kept his pistol raised but slowly backed away from Derek, limping toward the large bay window. He used the barrel of his gun to pull back the edge of the curtain just an inch. He looked out onto the manicured front lawn, and his breath caught in his throat. "They brought the cavalry," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling for the first time since I had known him. "It is the hostage rescue team. They have armored breaching vehicles on the lawn and snipers positioned on the neighboring roofs. We are completely boxed in." Derek dropped the vacuum-sealed stacks of $100 bills. The heavy bricks of cash hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, completely forgotten. He rushed to the window, peering out over Jamal's shoulder. He saw the tactical operators moving in absolute synchronization, setting up a perimeter of heavy steel shields. He saw the laser sights sweeping across the brick facade of our home. Derek knew protocol better than anyone. This was not a standard wellness check or a local police response to a domestic dispute. This was a Tier 1 federal siege. Before anyone could speak, a deafening voice boomed through a high-powered megaphone, echoing violently against the walls of the house. "Derek, this is the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The voice was mechanical, loud, and absolutely terrifying. "The property is entirely surrounded. You have no avenues of escape. Step out the front door slowly with your hands empty and visible." Inside the office, Martha let out a high-pitched gasp. She dropped the heavy bronze bookend. It crashed onto the floorboards, narrowly missing her expensive shoes. She grabbed Brianna's arm, pulling her daughter close. "Tell them we are hostages!" Martha hissed frantically to Brianna. "Tell them he held us here against our will!" The megaphone boomed again, cutting off her pathetic plotting. "We are executing a federal red notice. We have active warrants for your immediate arrest on charges of high treason, espionage, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Surrender immediately." The sheer weight of those words slammed into the room like a physical shockwave. Treason, espionage, RICO. These were not the charges of a botched robbery or a simple domestic murder. These were the darkest, most heavily penalized crimes in the American judicial system. Jamal spun around, his eyes wide with absolute horror. He aimed his gun directly at Derek, face his hand shaking violently. "Treason." Jamal roared over the sound of a helicopter chopping through the sky above. "You sold state secrets to foreign buyers. You dragged me into an international terrorism investigation. I am going to end you right here." Derek backed up until his spine hit the mahogany bookshelf. He held his hands up defensively, his face drained of all color. "No, no, listen to me, Jamal. I swear to you, I only took money from the cartel. I never sold intelligence. She framed me. Allison framed me. She must have manipulated my digital files. She set this whole thing up." Brianna let out a hysterical, mocking laugh, tears streaming down her dirty face. "Allison, you are blaming Allison for international terrorism. She is an accountant, Derek. She looks at spreadsheets all day. She does not know how to forge espionage documents. You lied to us about the $12 million, you lied about the cartel, and now we find out you are a traitor to the country." Martha fell to her knees, staring at the flashing lights reflecting on the polished floor. "I am going to die in federal prison," she sobbed loudly. "I just wanted my fair share. I did not want to be a terrorist." The megaphone shattered their argument with a final, chilling ultimatum. "You have exactly 3 minutes to open the front door and exit the structure. If you do not comply, we will deploy chemical agents and breach the walls by force. This is your final warning." The four of them were entirely paralyzed by fear. The corrupt agent, the violent mercenary, the greedy mother, and the selfish sister. They had spent the last 48 hours hunting me, believing they were the smartest predators in the room. Now they were trapped in a cage of their own making, staring down the barrel of the entire United States government. They had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no hope. I stood in the dark shadows of the dining room, watching their psychological collapse. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored blazer, smoothed my hair, and prepared to step into the light. It was time for the final audit. I took a quiet step backward into the laundry room, slipping out the same side door I had used to enter the house just minutes prior. The cold night air hit my face as I walked directly toward the perimeter of heavily armored vehicles parked on my front lawn. A tactical officer immediately raised his weapon, shouting a loud command to halt. I calmly held up my empty hands and stated my name clearly. I told them I was the primary whistleblower who had provided the intelligence to the Office of Professional Responsibility. The SWAT commander, a massive man in heavy black tactical gear, lowered his rifle and nodded at me. He had been expecting me to make contact. I fell into step right behind him as his specialized team advanced onto my front porch. Inside the house, the 3-minute deadline had officially expired. The tactical breaching unit placed a heavy hydraulic ram against the solid wood of my custom front door. With a deafening crack that echoed violently down the quiet suburban street, the door was forced open, splintering completely off its reinforced steel hinges. The SWAT commander stepped over the threshold, his assault rifle raised, scanning the home office. A dozen heavily armored operators flooded into the grand foyer, sweeping the perimeter with blinding tactical lights. And right behind the commander, stepping calmly over the shattered wood of my front door, was me. I was not the terrified, hysterical wife they had expected to find crying in the dusty attic 48 hours ago. I was dressed immaculately in a sharp-tailored white business suit. My hair was perfectly styled. There was not a single speck of dust or dirt on my clothing. I looked exactly like a senior forensic accountant arriving to finalize a hostile corporate liquidation. The reaction inside the home office was instantaneous and completely silent. The family froze in absolute shock. They stared at me as if I had just clawed my way out of a grave. Derek dropped his jaw, his eyes bulging out of his head. He blinked rapidly, entirely, unable to process the physical reality of my presence. He had spent the last 2 days believing I was a desperate fugitive hiding in the shadows. He never imagined I would walk through his front door escorted by a federal tactical team. "Drop the weapon right now," the SWAT commander roared, aiming his green laser sight directly at Jamal's chest. Jamal did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He knew the absolute lethal force of a federal hostage rescue team. He opened his hand and let his heavy pistol clatter onto the hardwood floor. He slowly raised his good arm and then his bloody arm lacing his fingers behind his head. He stared at me, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of profound terror and absolute realization. He finally understood how thoroughly he had been outplayed. 2 operators rushed forward, violently kicking the gun away and slamming Jamal against the mahogany bookshelf to secure his wrists in heavy steel cuffs. Derek did not move. He was entirely paralyzed, his back pressed heavily against the painted drywall, staring blankly at my pristine white suit, as if I were an alien creature. Martha and Brianna were huddled together on the floor near the shattered safe. My mother reached a trembling hand out toward me, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Allison," Martha whispered, her voice cracking with fake relief. "Oh my God, Allison. You are alive. We thought Derek had killed you. We were trying to stop him." I did not smile. I did not show a single ounce of familial warmth. I walked slowly into the center of the ruined home office, the crunch of broken glass and splintered wood echoing under my designer heels. I looked down at the $50,000 scattered across the floor, and then I looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "Save the performance, Martha," I said, my voice cold and loud enough for every federal agent in the room to hear. "I listened to your entire conversation at the country club. I listened to your screaming match in this exact room yesterday afternoon. I know you demanded $3 million in hush money. I know you and Brianna willingly aided a federal agent in a conspiracy to cover up my murder. Your performance as a grieving mother is officially canceled forever." Brianna let out a loud, hysterical sob, burying her face in her dirty hands. She knew the game was entirely over. They all knew it. The federal agents began moving aggressively through the room, securing the evidence and reading Miranda rights in sharp, clinical tones. But the true punishment was not the cold steel handcuffs or the heavy tactical rifles pointed directly at their chests. The true punishment was the absolute clarity of their devastating defeat. I had resurrected myself from their betrayal, completely unharmed, holding all the power and fully ready to deliver the final, crushing blow. I stood in the center of the shattered room, the red and blue police lights still flashing violently through the windows. The SWAT commander signaled his men to hold their positions, allowing me the floor. Derek remained pinned against the wall, his chest heaving, his eyes darting between me and the heavily armed federal agents. I reached into the pocket of my white blazer and pulled out a small encrypted silver USB drive. I held it up between my thumb and index finger so everyone could see it clearly. "This is your entire life, Derek," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Every single corrupted file, every offshore wire transfer, and every piece of audio from the last 48 hours is on this drive. I sent a duplicate to the director of the Office of Professional Responsibility, but I kept the original just to show you. You thought you could outsmart a forensic accountant with a staged home invasion. Instead, you handed me the exact tools I needed to legally annihilate you." Derek shook his head frantically. "You cannot do this to me, Allison. I am your husband. I made a mistake with the cartel, but I never committed treason. You know I did not do that." I stepped closer to him, my heels clicking sharply against the floorboards. You committed conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, I corrected him coldly. You hired your brother-in-law to shoot me in our attic. That alone carries a mandatory life sentence. But I knew internal affairs might offer you a quiet plea deal to avoid a public scandal, so I audited your cartel payments. I rerouted the digital signatures of your Cyprus shell companies to match accounts sanctioned by the United States Treasury for funding global terrorism. I took the highly classified operational reports you carelessly brought home and embedded them into the transaction metadata. The federal government does not see a corrupt agent with a gambling debt. They see an active trader selling American intelligence to foreign terrorists. That is federal treason, Derek. You are going to the Supermax facility in Florence, and you will never see the sky again. Brianna let out a high-pitched wail from the floor. She scrambled to her knees, her hands clasped together in desperate prayer. Allison, please, she begged, tears leaving dark streaks of makeup down her face. We did not know about the cartel. We did not know about the treason. Derek manipulated us. Jamal and I just wanted to pay off our debts. You cannot let them send us to federal prison. I am your sister. I turned my gaze to Brianna, feeling absolutely nothing but cold contempt. You are not a victim, Brianna. You stood in my living room and complained about my arrogance while you waited for Jamal to put a bullet in my head. You demanded $3 million in hush money. Under federal law, that makes you an accessory to first-degree murder before the fact. It also makes you guilty of wire fraud and federal extortion. You and Jamal are going to share adjoining federal cell blocks. Martha crawled forward, grabbing the hem of my pristine white trousers. Her perfectly styled hair was a complete mess, her designer clothes covered in dust from the breached door. Allison, look at me. Martha sobbed loudly, her voice trembling with absolute panic. I am your mother. I gave you life. You have to tell these agents that we were held hostage. We are blood. Family forgives family. Please have some mercy on us. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. I gently pulled my leg back, forcing her to let go of my suit. As a forensic auditor, I evaluate everything based on return on investment. I explained smoothly, looking down at her weeping face. For 34 years, I invested my time, my money, and my love into this family. The return on that investment was constant emotional abuse, financial theft, and eventually a coordinated assassination attempt. From a purely analytical standpoint, you are a toxic liability. You are a massive sunk cost. Martha gasped, recoiling as if I had physically struck her. You cannot just write off your own mother like a bad business deal, she cried. I just did, I replied flatly. When an asset becomes a lethal liability, you liquidate it. You wanted my $12 million so badly, you were willing to step over my dead body to get it. Now you get absolutely nothing. You have zero assets, zero leverage, and zero family left. I turned away from them and looked directly at the SWAT commander. I gave him a single sharp nod. The commander raised his hand, signaling his tactical operators to finally move in and make the arrests. The tactical operators surged forward, their heavy boots thundering against the ruined hardwood floor. Two agents grabbed Derek by the shoulders, forcefully spinning him around and slamming him face first against the mahogany bookshelf. He did not fight back. He went completely limp, his arrogant federal persona entirely shattered as the cold steel cuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, refusing to look at me as they read him his federal Miranda rights. Jamal was handled with extreme caution. 4 heavily armed men escorted him out, keeping their weapons trained on his chest until he was securely locked inside an armored transport vehicle. He was a professional mercenary, and he knew perfectly well that his life was effectively over. Then came my sister and mother. Brianna was crying so hard she could barely breathe, her legs giving out completely. 2 officers had to physically drag her by her arms across the foyer, her expensive silk pajamas dragging across the shattered wood of the front door. Martha fought them. She screamed and thrashed her designer dress, tearing at the seam as she desperately tried to claw her way back toward me. I watched her completely lose her mind, shrieking about betrayal and bloodlines, until an officer firmly pushed her head down and shoved her into the back of a brightly lit police cruiser. The heavy metal doors slammed shut one by one, sealing their fates inside the criminal justice system. I walked out onto the front porch, wrapping my white blazer tightly against the cold night wind. The entire neighborhood had woken up. Wealthy doctors, lawyers, and corporate executives stood on their manicured lawns in their bathrobes, watching in absolute stunned silence as the perfect affluent family was dismantled and hauled away like common street criminals. They were stripped of their wealth, their pristine reputations, and their dignity in front of everyone they spent years trying to impress. I did not look away. I stood tall under the glaring police spotlights, completely unbothered by the stares. My family had tried to bury me in the dark, but I was the only one left standing in the light. 3 days later, I stood in that exact same spot on the front porch. The crime scene tape had been removed, but the house felt entirely dead. It was no longer a home. It was just an empty monument to greed. A black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway, and my primary real estate attorney stepped out carrying a thick leather folder. He handed me a silver pen and a stack of legal documents. I did not read the fine print. I already knew exactly what the contract stated. I was selling the $3 million property to a commercial demolition firm for a fraction of its market value. I signed my name on the final line, executing the immediate transfer of the deed. "Tear it all down to the foundation," I told the attorney, handing him the paperwork. "Leave absolutely nothing behind. I want it completely erased." I watched the heavy yellow bulldozers already idling at the edge of the street, waiting for my final authorization. I turned my back on the massive custom-built home and walked to my waiting car without shedding a single tear. By the time the first wrecking ball smashed through the master bedroom window, I was 30,000 feet in the air. I settled into my plush leather seat in the first-class cabin of a direct flight to Zurich, Switzerland. The cabin was whisper quiet, a beautiful contrast to the deafening sirens and screaming that had defined my last week. A smiling flight attendant approached quietly and handed me a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I thanked her and took a slow, satisfying sip. The crisp liquid burned pleasantly down my throat. I pulled my phone from my purse and connected to the secure satellite network. I opened my encrypted banking application and scanned my fingerprint. The screen glowed bright green, displaying the full $12 million balance, sitting safely in an untouchable offshore account. My husband, my sister, and my mother were currently sitting in cold federal holding cells, facing decades behind bars, while I was traveling the world with my entire fortune perfectly intact. I locked the screen, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath of the recycled cabin air. It tasted like pure, unadulterated freedom. Have you ever had to completely destroy your past to build a safe future? Have you ever cut ties with toxic family members who only valued you for what they could take from you? Let me know your story in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories of survival, justice, and revenge. Remember, you never have to tolerate abuse just because it comes from blood. Sometimes the most beautiful life begins the exact moment you finally choose to walk away. The chilling story of Allison's survival serves as a powerful testament to a harsh but necessary truth. Sharing a bloodline or a marriage certificate does not automatically guarantee love, loyalty, or safety. Often the most dangerous betrayals come from those who sleep under the same roof. Allison's harrowing journey exposes the dangerous illusion that we must infinitely forgive family members simply because they are family. Her mother, sister, and husband used the guise of familial bonds to mask their deep-seated greed and entitlement. Society frequently pressures individuals to sweep toxic behaviors under the rug, urging reconciliation in the name of keeping the family together. However, Allison's analytical approach, viewing her abusive relatives as liabilities and sunk costs, strips away this societal guilt. It reminds us that toxicity is toxicity, regardless of who is inflicting it. The profound lesson here is that true empowerment is born from radical self-preservation. When people repeatedly demonstrate that they view you as a resource rather than a human being, you owe them absolutely nothing. Allison's ultimate victory was not just in legally dismantling her attackers. It was found in her complete emotional detachment. She realized that her safety, her sanity, and her future were worth infinitely more than seeking validation from people incapable of giving it. Walking away from an abusive environment is never a failure. It is an act of profound courage and self-respect. We must learn to recognize when a relationship has become a threat to our well-being and find the strength to sever those ties completely. Rebuilding a life on your own terms is the ultimate revenge against those who tried to break you. Evaluate the relationships in your own life today and have the courage to set the boundaries you need to protect your peace.